Welcome to Rising Stars, where Miriam Knight, publisher of New Consciousness Review, interviews exciting new voices in the world of progressive and transformational books, films, and ideas, who offer intriguing perspectives on life, the universe, and everything in between. Join us as we celebrate the conscious awakening and explore many expressions of consciousness in action.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to New Consciousness Review and the Rising Stars Show. Our guest today is Eileen Day McKusick. She is the author of a fascinating book called Tuning the Human Biofield, Healing with Vibrational Sound Therapy. I so enjoyed the book, so I'm delighted that she could be with us today. You know, Eileen is a researcher, writer, educator, and practitioner who has been studying the effects of audible sound on the human body since 1996. She originated something called Biofield Tuning. It's a unique therapeutic method using tuning forks to identify and correct imbalances in the body's energy field. Eileen is the founder of the Biofield Tuning Institute in Burlington, Vermont, on the other side of the country, and I'm delighted she could come all the way to the West Coast to be with us today. Hi, Eileen.
Hi, Miriam.
Eileen, I was really impressed by your book, especially the way you have kind of synthesized all of the information that you seem to soak up like a sponge and then put it in such clear language for the reader to understand your process and your path. How did you decide that sound healing was something real, something that you could do?
Well, it was actually a conclusion I came to using logic and curiosity. I think I read Deepak Chopra's book, Quantum Healing, back in the mid-90s, which introduced me to the idea that everything is vibration. What the quantum physicists of the early part of the 19th century discovered, that everything is really just vibration, even though it appears to be solid. And right after that, I read a book on the use of color, sound, and music in healing. And I remember thinking, well, if everything is vibration and I'm vibration, then treating vibration with vibration seems to make a lot of sense to me. And so, as a researcher by nature, if I get interested in a particular topic, I tend to go down that rabbit hole. And so I went off and found everything I could at that point in the mid-90s to research that topic. And the more I read, the more sense it made. And then I just happened to get a catalog in the mail that had a set of tuning forks for healing in it. And, I was already sold. So I ordered them. And I had a small part-time massage therapy practice, and I just started experimenting with them and found it fascinating. And, 20 years later, it's still fascinating. So it's held my attention, which is, as somebody who gets bored easily, says a lot to what is here with sound healing.
So you developed this biofield tuning really empirically through trial and error.
Absolutely, through trial and error. Yeah. Just, basically waving tuning forks around people, kind of with curiosity, and seeing what I noticed and listening to their feedback, and, starting to observe patterns and trends and things like that. And, over time, the practice, it just emerged and evolved, and it continues to evolve. It's an ever-evolving process, for sure.
What conditions did you use it for at the beginning that really caught your attention?
Yeah, at the beginning, I didn't use it for any conditions. At the beginning, I was just like, hey, I've got these tuning forks. I want to play with them. Will you be a guinea pig? So it wasn't even with any intention to treat anything. It was just sort of like, let me just try this and see what happens. And then, what it seemed to work on revealed itself in time and really continues to reveal itself because, everything really is vibration. Physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, genetic, ancestral levels is all vibrationally encoded in the body and the body's field. And so anything that is, a problem usually makes noise of some kind or another. And the tuning forks can be used to find that noise and help the body to resolve it. It's a very, very simple, elegant, but very effective method.
So when you say the tuning forks can be used to locate noise, does their sound shift subtly as you're going over areas of concern?
It does. It does. And that was something that, right off the bat, the very first day that I noticed, and I was really surprised by it. I really thought, a tuning fork is going to produce an objective, consistent tone wherever you put it. And what I didn't expect was this interface between the acoustic emissions of the body and the overtones and undertones produced by the tuning fork. So, if somebody had pain in a particular area, when I held the tuning fork over that area, it would sound funny. It would sound, either full of static or it would sound really sharp. And I found that if I kept it there for a little while, that the tone would resolve into a kind of harmony, and then the person would come back the next time and say, you know what, all that pain in my shoulder went away after you used the tuning fork on it. And then they'd be like, can you do that on me again? And so my massage practice morphed very quickly into a sound practice driven by customer demand.
That's fascinating. Were you musically trained? To be able to hear these differences? I imagine they were fairly subtle.
They're actually not as subtle as people might think that they are. I can teach a class with 15 people in it, and the sound can go into distortion, and everybody can hear it. You can hear it from 15 feet away if the acoustics are good in a room. So, no, I'm not musical. In fact, I'm the opposite of musical in a lot of ways. I was always the kid in music class that was clapping on the offbeat and singing out of key and squeaking my clarinet. I have no natural musical gifts whatsoever. In fact, I started taking singing lessons when I was 20, and over the course of 7 years, teachers, and the first 5 told me I would never be able to sing because I was tone deaf. So I don't have any particular, acuity in that department, although I have learned how to not be tone deaf, so that does not have to be a life sentence. But no, it's not music therapy, and it's not even really, based in any kind of music. I don't even use the musical scale in my work or anything like that. It's really much more about this sort of just information and interface that goes on.
I have seen correspondences between the chakras and different frequencies. So, it stands to reason that if we are vibrational beings, we would respond to the patterns that are found in nature, I would guess, and in mathematics, really.
Mm-hmm. Oh, this is what I really realized over time, is that it's all math. It's all, what started off as sort of an intuitive fumble in the dark, has really turned into a very precise understanding of the mathematical coding of the body's energy field and particular pathologies and emotions. It's all very patterned.
Now, what role does thought and intention play in all of this?
It plays a really big role. Intention is like we all have this superpower and magical ability with intention, and we don't really realize just how powerful intention is. But, our intention affects the environment around us, the stuff that life is made of, this existence, this world is made of, responds very profoundly to intention. I think it's a very unexplored, not really understood phenomenon, honestly. And so having a clear intention and focused attention combined with sound produces a very powerful modality.
So that's from the side of the therapist, which stands to reason, since you are using essentially thought to drive your intention. And thought is presumably what created the imbalance in the first place.
Yeah.
How do you visualize it being held in the energy field for you to find?
That's a good question. We tend to think of thought as something that happens inside our head. And what I've discovered is that thought really takes place in your body's field. So when I say field, I mean your aura, your human energy field. I consider it a diffuse magnetic bubble or toroidal shape that isn't really so different, from a fractal consideration from the magnetosphere of the Earth or the heliosphere of the Sun. Humans, Earth, Sun are all electrical beings with a north and south pole that generate this bioplasmic, in the case of humans, sort of bubble around them. And I've really come to see this as the medium of mind and consciousness. And my work has revealed that our field has a specific anatomy and physiology to it, that different states of mind actually inhabit different regions within the field. And so when we energize a particular state of mind or a particular thought, we actually light up and create movement and illumination in a particular part of our field.
So it's kind of like an extension of the brain map outside of the body.
Yeah, exactly. It appears to have a very specific anatomy and physiology, just like the brain does. Yep. And that's my unique work, is that I've actually mapped this field and determined, and this is something that emerged over, the 20 years that I've been doing this, and continues to emerge, because it is a very complex structure with a lot of layers and contains enormous amounts of information. So it continues to be an evolving exploration, and it's definitely a hypothesis. And I'm not saying this is fact. I'm simply saying my observations and my research have revealed that if people are running a lot of sadness, for example, I'm going to find a lot of energy. And the way that I know there's energy there is that the tuning fork vibrates more loudly off their left shoulder. Depression tends to sit like a low pressure system just off the left shoulder. And I can find that based on the feedback from the tuning forks, and I can actually manipulate it or modulate it to shift the way the energy is flowing. And basically, if it's sitting like a low pressure system, I come in with a tuning fork, break it up, help to harmonize its vibration, and then integrate that energy back into the system. I mean, it's very much like any alternative healing approach seeks to break up stagnation to introduce flow. And so that's what I'm doing with my tuning forks, is I'm finding areas of stagnation or stuckness or frozenness, or overactivity. If somebody has a tendency to have a really busy mind and they go round and round in circles with their mind, they tend to break down in their right hip, of all places. So, you don't think...
That hit home.
Yes, right hip is the home of busy body, busy mind. And so, I can go in there 18 inches off your right hip and actually slow down your thinking mind. 18 inches off your right hip.
Where were you when I needed you before my hip replacement?
Yeah. So, it's a really different way of looking at mind. And I see all our memories as stored here in a very specific kind of compartmentalized and even timeline fashion, meaning that as we generate information, as we generate our experience, it's all vibrational, and it gets encoded in these standing waves in this bioplasmic medium, so that information I find close to someone is current or recently generated. Information I find at the outer edge of a person's field relates to their gestation, to their birth, to their earliest childhood. And then everything else falls in between, like rings in a tree. So depending on where I find distortion and resistance, I can tell you exactly what age it was generated, and what it was related to.
Are the concentric rings similar from person to person in terms of the distance from the body?
Yes, depending on your age. So a 10-year-old has the same size field as an 80-year-old. Only it's like as we get older, it's like our hard drive fills up. So, halfway through the field of a 10-year-old would be when they were 5. Halfway through the field of an 80-year-old would be when they were 40. So that's how it works.
Interesting.
It gets smaller. That's why memory retrieval gets harder as we get older.
Aha. And it's like the new memories just kind of squish the other ones like an accordion.
That's right.
So what were some of the more fascinating or surprising discoveries that you made doing this work?
Well, I think I say in my book that this surprised me and that surprised me, and then I was surprised by this. It's definitely, uncharted territory in a lot of ways, what I've been exploring. And so it's been full of surprises, which has actually been really fun. But I think, the biggest surprise was when I first got my tuning forks, they came with this little tiny instruction book, and it was the C major scale. And it said you use C over the root chakra, D over the second, E over the third, and so on. And so it got me into this model of working over the chakras. And what I would discover when I started, I'd kind of wave the tuning fork around the body, like in the area of a chakra, an energy center. And I discovered, probably the very first time I did it, that some areas were loud. And I associated when the tuning fork got louder that there was more energy in that particular place. And I remember thinking, well, if it's going to sound loud anywhere, it should probably sound loud over the energy center, right? And so I discovered that I could use the tuning fork like you would use a magnet to move, say, iron filings. And I could hook into the loud spots and I could move them. And so I developed this little technique that I called click, drag, and drop, where I would find a loud spot, drag it to the center, and then drop it in, where it would feel like it was actually like sucked in to the chakra itself. And then it wouldn't sound loud where it had been. It would sound loud over the chakra. So for years, that's what I did. I just worked close to the body. One day in 2006, I accidentally discovered a loud spot about 2.5 feet off of somebody's neck. And they were complaining of a problem in their neck and shoulder and jaw. They felt pain and a sense of pulling. And so, I moved it back to center, and it felt very odd to drag, a spot that far. And they called me the next day and told me that all of their pain and pulling was gone.
Wow.
Yeah. And so I found that really intriguing. And so the next person who came in, I started as far away from them as I could in my treatment room, which was about 6 feet. And that began the exploration of, what I ended up calling the biofield. But it led to so many questions. I was like, what is this medium? What is this stuff that I'm moving around? Because it feels like stuff. What law of physics is governing the fact that a tuning fork seems to move this stuff? I had so many questions and, ended up going off on an academic adventure to try to answer it through academia. I ended up enrolling in college as an adult. I never went to college out of high school. I got my undergraduate degree, my master's degree. Now I'm working on my PhD, all in an effort to kind of tease out the mystery that is the human energy field. And in the process of this, I've discovered that there is, it is a frontier science. And there's actually a whole bunch of people trying to map the biofield. And I'm like, I've been living in the mountains of Vermont for the last 15 years. I've already done that, So it's fascinating and exciting to be able to apply science to the whole thing.
I noticed that you actually teach sound healing at Johnston State College. Does that mean that sound healing is now being accepted by the mainstream?
It's starting to move into the mainstream. Johnston State College is a unique school. It was one of the first, if not the first, public college to have a wellness and alternative medicine undergraduate program. And that's what I got my degree in. I just happen to live in Johnson, so that was convenient. It was, raised some eyebrows in the administration, I think, but, it works. I would like to see, the term sound healing, I'm more interested in this at this point from an area of biofield science. I tend to think of biofield tuning more as a biofield therapy than sound healing, because it is very precise and it is very much based on this biofield anatomy concept. I've received sound baths with bowls and gongs, and, they're nice, but it's not even close to what can be done with a tuning fork placed in the right area, 5 feet away from somebody's right knee for half an hour. A very precise input into something like a very traumatic birth record can change a person's life instantly. So it's a little different from what we're calling sound healing.
I noticed that you really did a pretty thorough study of many different vibrational and energy medicine modalities. I was wondering if, having come up with the Biofield map, whether you have ever experimented with using, say, a laser light to pull the energy around.
I haven't worked with lasers, although I think the combination of sound and laser could be very powerful.
So, how does sound compare with other vibrational modalities like laser and microcurrent and electrical modalities?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting. I think just the acoustic nature of a tuning fork is really brilliant, because you can work with what I call resonance and entrainment. The tuning fork will initially resonate with the body. It meets the body where the body is at. And then, because it produces this very simple coherent output, it can entrain the body into a more coherent expression. So, the tuning fork, I think with any kind of therapy or any kind of therapist, there's a need to feel met where you're at. And there's also, a tuning fork produces technically an infinite number of overtones and undertones, many different frequencies going on. And sometimes it's at the level of the very, very subtle that really magical things happen. And so there's space for that with a tuning fork where there isn't necessarily in something like electrostim.
Do you use different tuning forks for different purposes, or are they kind of really mapped according to the chakras?
So I kind of abandoned that chakra model. Really, at this point, have whittled my practice down. At one point, I used up to 30 or more forks in a session. I was, really thought, more is better. A series of circumstances kind of forced me to limit what I was using. And now I only use 4. I use 2 unweighted forks for field work. And then I use two weighted forks, which you activate a fork. They've got little barrels on the ends of the tines, and they're designed to kind of drive the vibration down into the handle. So you can place the handle of these weighted forks on, say, a trigger point, and it helps to loosen that up. So I use those on the body and the unweighted forks on the field. Most of the practice, though, can be done with just one fork. There isn't a need for lots of different frequencies. I know that there are, different schools of thought that say, the frequency of a healthy kidney is 137.2 hertz, and therefore if you're treating kidney disease, you need to use that particular frequency. I've found that what is important in the way that I approach things is just a coherent input. That, it's really about finding the very specific areas within the field and holding the fork in that right place for the right amount of time that gives the body enough self-awareness and enough time to just correct itself. And it knows what its right frequency is. It just needs something to balance itself against. So in biofield tuning, the specific frequency isn't as important as the specific location and time period.
Mm-hmm. And do you find a higher tone or a lower tone more powerful?
Well, I predominantly use a frequency that is 174 hertz. And having really experimented with a lot of different frequencies, this one is just in a good range. It's not pretty. It's not like, but I do have one higher fork, if we want something pretty. But this one is really useful for breaking up energy, for locating it, for reading it, for breaking it up, getting it moving.
Where do you see therapeutic sound going, Eileen?
Oh, I think it's going to explode. I see we're at the cusp, like where yoga was 15 years ago. It's maybe 20 years ago. It is definitely about to really take off, and on a lot of different fronts. There's a lot of people getting into things like bowls and gongs and this sort of sound healing thing, but then even it's cropping up in medical stuff. They're definitely exploring the power of sound. It is such a powerful and such an oddly overlooked medium.
I think both sound and light really are going to be coming into their own shortly, if for no other reason than they don't have any negative side effects and they actually produce results.
They produce results. I mean, they really produce results. I grew my practice in the middle of nowhere in the mountains of Vermont in a poor, rural, conservative area, waving tuning forks around. and I solved people's problems. They went and they told their friends, and people were willing. You get to a place where you've tried a bunch of things to solve your problems and nothing works. You're willing to try something a little weird. And I grew a very, very busy practice in the middle of nowhere because it works.
That's really the story of alternative medicine, isn't it?
Yeah.
So do you see Biofield actually going into mainstream medicine?
Yes. Yeah, I think it's going to be the biofield is going to be a hot topic within the next 5 years. I think it's going to really start to push its way, and it changes everything. I mean, I just spoke at this conference called the Science and Non-Duality Conference in San Jose a couple weeks ago. And, I introduced my biofield anatomy hypothesis. And somebody came up to me afterwards and they said, you're either crazy or this is opening up a whole new world of research. This is really a big deal. And, I'm inclined to think that that's the case. I think that the combination of sound, information medicine, actually, Lynn McTaggart said in the movie The Matrix, she said, informational medicine that changes the information in the biofield is the future of medicine. And I nearly fell off my chair when I heard her say that, because I was like, that's exactly what I'm doing. I am changing the information in the biofield, and it produces results in the physiology immediately. That when you're working on the body, you're band-aiding things. Even naturopaths are like, oh, your adrenals aren't working, take this supplement, that supplement, and these umpteen supplements, and don't eat this and don't eat that. Whereas I can go in with my tuning fork, find the edge of the adrenal field, which is about 3 feet off the body, and get in phase, lock phase with its rhythm, and train it from its accelerated rhythm back to its factory setting. It can take 20 minutes, and it changes the adrenal output completely. Once your adrenals aren't running, your digestion improves. Everything runs better. So that is a radically different approach to say, I'm going to change the rhythm and the speed and the tone of your adrenals. I'm not going to Band-Aid you with this, that, and the other supplement. It's immediate, and it's effective. It's powerful.
My goodness. So where do people find out more about you, Eileen? Do you have a website? And presumably you're training therapists in this modality.
So my website is biofieldtuning.com. And Biofield is just all one word. And I offer training. I just committed to a space in San Diego. So we have Biofield Tuning Institute West in San Diego and East in Burlington, Vermont. And I offer classes in both. To become a certified practitioner is 3 3-day trainings that are about 3 months apart. And, it's really easy to learn. It's a simple, easy to learn, surprisingly powerful method. And, even in class, students, the first time they pick up the forks will help a classmate to relieve pain or suffering of some kind or another. I mean, it's really instant. And I think it's the sort of thing that a lot of practitioners, people who do Reiki, are kind of looking for something that's, the next step for healing. So it's you can integrate it into what you're doing. You can use it as a standalone, and it's really versatile. So I have, upcoming trainings next year. And then I've also have started working I learned that I could do this work at a distance. And that was kind of an interesting discovery because I didn't think that I could. When my book came out, my already busy practice went off the hook. And so I decided to do some experiments to see if I could work on groups all at once, and discovered that I could. And so I sort of solved my scheduling problem by offering groups. We have a few different ones, one for digestive wellness, one for low back and hip pain, worry, anxiety, and fear, and another one on getting focused and getting unstuck. So that makes it really affordable, because when you have a book come out and your practice goes off the hook, your rates go through the roof. And because I grew my practice ministering to the poor rural population, I felt really odd about charging a lot of money. So the groups are super affordable for people.
Well, listeners dear, you'll just have to get the book. It's called Tuning the Human Biofield by Eileen Day McKusick. And their website is biofieldtuning.com. Eileen, thank you so much for being with us today.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Miriam.
Hello, everyone. I'm Miriam Knight from New Consciousness Review, and our next rising star is visionary entrepreneur Paul O'Brien. Paul left an executive position in high tech to invent a new category of multimedia software in 1989. It evolved eventually to become the world's largest astrology and divination website. And when his company was acquired in 2007, for, I might add, a very tidy sum of money, Paul turned his energies to speaking and writing about visionary decision-making. He founded the Divination Foundation, whose website is divination.com, and on it you will also find the podcast of the Pathways radio show, which he has produced and hosted for over 30 years. Paul is the author of 3 books, including Divination, Sacred Tools for Reading the Mind of God, The Visionary I Ching, a book of changes for intuitive decision-making, and his latest book, which we're going to discuss today, called Great Decisions, Perfect Timing, Cultivating Intuitive Intelligence. Welcome, Paul. It's so lovely to reconnect with you.
It's beautiful, Miriam. Thank you very much for having me.
Now, Paul, you are a great advocate for the use of divination to support decision-making. What do you think divination tools are tapping into?
Well, they're tapping into the subconscious, which is basically linked to the collective unconscious, as Carl Jung called it. They're connecting to all of the archetypal powers that are available to us, such as the 64 hexagrams of the I Ching or the 78 cards of Tarot, or the gods and goddesses of all religions. We have all of these resources that we can tap into if we're given the right tools. And that's basically what the book Great Decisions, Perfect Timing is all about. And divination is one of those tools. It's only one chapter in the book. It doesn't hinge on divination. A divination system is a set of archetypes that you operate on in order to activate the synchronicity principle. And so you basically you cast a reading or you pick cards, and that event is a meaningful coincidence. The card that you pick represents an archetype, and all 78 archetypes are presumably inside of you, which is kind of the definition of archetypes. They're also in the collective unconscious. And so it's kind of the things that come into our dreams, and that's what Carl Jung noticed, was the dreams of people all over the world had common elements, even though their cultures and their mythologies were different. And that's how he discovered the collective unconscious. So we use divination to tap into that.
I'm wondering, I had a reading from a medium a few weeks ago, and this probably was the best reading I've ever had. and I was quite astounded at its accuracy. Now, what this medium did while he was doing the reading was scribble with his right hand, which he said was to get him out, to keep his left brain busy while he connected with his intuitive faculties. And I'm wondering if the divination tools, astrology, whatever, are really almost like the feather in Dumbo the elephant's nose that enabled him to fly, the magic feather. It really is more a way of gaining your confidence and allowing you to express this intent of connecting with the field of universal intelligence.
Oh, that is so well put. I couldn't agree with you more, because basically people who look to these things to predict the future or to give them precise directions or information are looking are missing the point. The value in an I Ching reading, which is the form of divination that I actually created the software around in 1989 and have since written my own version, a Western version of the I Ching, the visionary I Ching, as you described. That's the one I know, and basically I say we use it to stimulate the intuition or activate the intuition around problems that logic can't handle. And there's a lot of problems in life that logic can't handle. Timing issues, relationships, office politics, the list goes on. And so I use divination when I have a problem when I have something like that, but I don't expect it to tell me what to do or to predict the future. I'm just looking for a little bit of a nudge so that I can think outside the box of black and white thinking. And if I get one new idea, it basically activates your intuition. And so my whole mission in life as an entrepreneur, since I left an executive position as a software marketing specialist in 1988 to start to develop I Ching software, and that for me was all about empowering people with this tool, this interactive I Ching, and later I added Tarot, and then after that, numerology, and then astrology. I wanted to empower people to find their inner psychic or their inner medium and learn how to read between the lines on their own. So that's sort of been my mission in life, is to create tools that empower people to cultivate intuitive intelligence, as the subtitle of my new book says it.
Well, when you left the company that you were working for to put everything that you had into the development of this website and software program, that was a major step. Were you using the I Ching to guide you, and how did that work?
Well, absolutely. You know, I was using the I Ching. I was actually at that point in my career, I was the vice president of a high-tech company, and I made a lot of money. And I had a high salary, but I was very unhappy with the office politics. The owner was an engineer who had never worked for anybody in his life. Anyway, and I was using the I Ching at work. And that's kind of cumbersome. It was a big book, and I had to find a private closet or something to cast the coins in. And one day it occurred to me, I sure wish I could just do this on my computer. And a light bulb went off that inspired me to see if it could be done. But then I actually was so excited about it, because I had loved the I Ching my entire adult life. But I never made any significant decisions in my entire adult life without consulting the I Ching. Now, did I always let it inform me? Well, sometimes I was better at it than others.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, no. And so when I actually made I Ching software, or when I said, hey, I want to see if I can do this, I consulted the I Ching, and the I Ching, basically I feel the I Ching told me to do it. And it was, I got the hexagram breakthrough, turning into abundance. Now, the abundance didn't come for another 15 years. But anyway, that's how the I Ching was involved in its own computer-assisted transformation.
It's interesting about the timing, because you said that the abundance card or hexagram came up, but it didn't happen for another 15 years. But in that intervening 15 years, you were firmly fixed on the notion of abundance. So it could very well be just invoking the law of attraction.
Well, I didn't think about abundance as much as I thought about meaning. I chose meaning over money. I left a high-paying job to do this very risky, foolhardy thing, really. All of my peers thought I was crazy to think that I could make a business out of I Ching software in 1989, and they were pretty right. But I was so fascinated by the I Ching, by that point in my life, I've been using it for 20 years almost, and I was fascinated by the potential of multimedia software. So there was this creative fixation that developed within me, and I was in love with I was just fascinated by the idea of developing the intersection between these two things that had fascinated me for a long time. So it kind of got a hold of me. My motto at the time was, wherever God drags me, I will follow, because I couldn't rationalize it any other way. But really what I was looking for above all was what I called creative freedom. And that was that had a very modest definition. It just meant making a living doing something that was meaningful to me or something I cared about. It wasn't paying off the mortgage. It wasn't becoming wealthy. It wasn't, it wasn't what it turned into. But so it's a great story, and the book has my story in there, the story of somebody who chose meaning over money, and then the money came anyway. But it was never really about making a lot of money, because I could not even fathom that I Ching software could ever have that big a market.
Sure.
At the time. And it still doesn't. The I Ching, so I have an I Ching app now called the Visionary I Ching. It's in the Apple Store, it's in the Google Store, and it's fantastic, and I love it. And it's through the nonprofit Divination Foundation. But in my career as an entrepreneur and a product developer, the I Ching was the least remunerative thing I ever did, but it was the soul of the whole thing.
I think it also illustrates what happens when you work from the soul, from your heart and soul.
Right.
And it's really the success that you've had is icing on the cake.
Well, and it's more creative freedom is what it is.
Absolutely.
I attracted creative freedom in spades, but I didn't even fully visualize it. So that's kind of interesting, because usually when we hear about visualization and creative manifestation, we sort of have the assumption that we need to be able to visualize the magnificent scope of what it is. And I didn't at all. I just wanted to I just wanted to be able to support myself and my son as an entrepreneur. That's a tall enough order to begin with.
I think so many people are in a similar position today, that they are in jobs that destroy their soul, and they would love to be able to earn their living doing what they love.
Yeah, but you know what? I tell people, honor your day job. I actually wrote a blog about that, because even when I did this big transition, it was huge. I continued to work for that company for a couple of years as a international marketing consultant. Mm-hmm. And I tell people, I said, in the 1700s, you were not able to choose your vocation or where you lived or even who you married. And so it wasn't until the latter part of the 19th century that we had the freedom to choose any of those things, really, for the most part. And I'm talking about the wide swath of the population in England and in America. We didn't have any freedom at all. And so the freedom that we have now is incredible. And so, of course, we always want more freedom. That's human nature. I call it creative freedom because I'm creative. But we always want more than it's an expansionary, evolutionary urge for more freedom. So, yeah, it's a big dream to be able to make a living doing something you love. But I I think it's pretty good karma right now. And I tell people, if you have a day job that's not like destroying your soul, that's a really good thing. And most people have a day job. Even I have a day job now. I mean, my day job is to pay my taxes and to make decisions about my investments. It doesn't take up a lot of my time, which gives me a tremendous amount of creative freedom. But nevertheless, I don't really enjoy those things. And it's just kind of the nitty-gritty. And everybody has a day job.
Sure. But you also need some kind of creative outlet to get those juices flowing.
Right, of course. And so artists and actors, are working in restaurants, but they have to do it on the side, and most people do.
So let's get back to the subject of your book, which is visionary decision making. Presumably this relies on developing one's sense of intuition, one's connection, if you will. How can people improve their intuition, Paul?
Well, in chapter 2, in the second part of the book, I have like 5 chapters that answer that question. And it involves, some of it has to do, it starts with self-knowledge and becoming aware of what fascinates you. And so I like using my story as an example. I was fascinated by the I Ching, and I was fascinated by the potential of software as an interactive experiential tool. People are fascinated by different things, but a lot of times people don't honor what they were fascinated by during stage 1 of their life, which is the student stage. So I talk about the stages of life. I talk about how to pinpoint your fascinations. In other words, how to tap into your creative side. And then I talk about how the intuition is like a tiny little antenna. I say the 5 senses are like huge antenna on your mind. And they're bringing in a lot of information and a lot of stray signals, a lot of noise. And you got the visual sense, you got the olfactory sense, you got the auditory sense. There's a lot of sounds and sights. And so you've got this dinky little 6th antenna. They've called it the 6th sense for 1,000 years, which is the intuition. Now this antenna is calibrated to a very fine, subtle, quiet signal. And it's easily drowned out by the noise of the senses and all of the bombardment that we live with these days, with information streaming all in every direction. And then there's the internal clattering of the mind. So basically, the intuition is an antenna. This is my presentation of it, and it works great if there's not too much noise on the line and if there's not too much internal clattering going on. So you got to quiet yourself down. So there's these exercises in the book that are mindfulness exercises that reduce the noise so that you can have a clearer channel. And then we also talk about using dreams as a source of information that could be relative to decision making. And then there's a chapter on channeling archetypes, in particular the archetypes that are relevant to executive decision making. Because in the book I present everybody's the CEO of their own lives. And the quality of the decisions you make is directly correlated with the level of success and happiness that you're going to experience. Decision making is the master skill. This is the royal skill, and it's what we pay CEOs a fortune to do. It's their primary job, and it's what we pay politicians a lot, give them a lot of power to do on our collective behalf. This is important stuff. The decisions you make is the most important thing, highest leverage activity you do, and you'd think we'd be good at it with this power to visualize, but really, Miriam, we suck. We're either too emotional or we're over analytical. There's so many ways to do it wrong, and we're not in touch with our intuition anymore. We're out of sync with nature. So this is a book about how to get back into how to re-engage the intuition and how to use some of these psychological constructs like archetypes and the synchronicity principle to make better decisions, and then cultivate your intuition in the process. And once your intuition starts to wake up, your timing starts to get better. And why is that? Because timing is a decision. It's answering the question, when should I make my move? The first question is, what's the best next move to make? And the second question is, and when should I pull the trigger? That's the timing question. That's 100% intuitive. So if your intuition is good, your timing is going to be better. And so that's until you get more and more in sync with perfect timing, which is what Carl Jung called synchronicity. So it's a system. The whole book is a system. It's got these moving parts. And then there's a chapter on divination, and I focus on the I Ching because that's the one I know. That's the one I've written. I was just in China, and I talked to a PhD class at China Academy of Social Sciences under the auspices of this doctor of philosophy, Taoist philosophy. It's amazing how China's opening up. And I gave this talk about my I Ching, which I wrote 25 years ago, and I have the app now. I gave it to this class of PhD students who are all doing dissertations on the I Ching, and it was amazing. They loved it. They loved that somebody in the West was honoring their tradition like that, and also that I was bringing Western psychology to bear on it and really coming up with a personal growth I Ching, which they can't do because all the I Ching scholars in China are focused on the technical accuracy and the historical accuracy, and it's all very technical and left brain. So it was fun. It was fantastic.
Maybe you should tell our listeners a little bit about the Visionary I Ching program and book that you wrote. I really enjoyed your illustrated book. How you have brought it into modern times.
Well, what happened was I had that vision I was telling you about this intersection between the I Ching and software. In other words, a software version of the I Ching. And then I quickly, and I did it. I hired a programmer and I made it work. And I wanted to see if it really would work, and it did. But I didn't have any text because I didn't have any rights to all of the various book versions of the I Ching that I was familiar with. I had about 20 different versions, and I've been studying it for 20 years. But so then I thought, well, you know what? I really want to write my own anyway, because I am not that happy with any of the versions, and they all have good things about them. So I basically, with the help of a Taoist writer friend of mine, wrote my own version of the I Ching, which I call the Visionary I Ching. And then I added art to it because this woman was an inspired I Ching artist who had 64 paintings already done, and she was looking for a place, she was just selling her paintings.
Synchronicity.
Yeah, it's amazing. So I had all of a sudden I had an illustrated I Ching, and then I made a CD-ROM out of it later, and now it's out in the form of a book. But this text what I was striving for was a version of the I Ching which goes back 3,000 years. It's fairly patriarchal because Confucius had a huge stamp on it. And Chinese culture has been extremely patriarchal for God knows how long, probably 5,000 years or maybe 3,000. But in any case, the I Ching is pretty patriarchal. It always talks about the superior man. I wanted to have a version of the I Ching that was
more universal.
Well, non-sexist.
Mm-hmm.
For sure. There's no superior man in my version. and then I wanted it to be non-militaristic too. In the old Chinese I Ching, you've got things that says like the army marches to the southwest. Okay, well, nobody knows what that means anymore, and I don't give a damn anyway. So, because it was used by generals and the emperor, and it was used in military context. So I took all that military stuff out. And I also wanted it to be more Taoist and less Confucian. Confucianism is about, being humble and staying in your place and performing your role and doing what you're told. And whereas Taoism is much more in line with the American temperament of rugged individualism and idiosyncratic pioneers, and they have the crazy Buddha, and the Taoists are really very individualistic and very freedom oriented. So I thought that's a much better, and I'm a Taoist anyway. So that was so I wrote my own I Ching, and it's evolved over the last 25 years, and now it's an app, and I'm really proud of the app. This French developer approached me, and he was looking for an I Ching author, and that's how that happened. So you're right. When you're coming from your heart, and when you're and when your timing keeps improving, you don't really even have to even focus on timing. Stuff just comes to you. There's so many stories in the book about how this guy calls me up and offers me the domain name tarot.com. I mean, because he liked the way that I was doing divination software. Mm-hmm. And this woman leased me a house. I was the 100th person in line, and she asked me what I did. And I said, well, I make this quirky little software for the Macintosh. This was in 1990. And she goes, really? I have a Macintosh. What is it? And I said, it's called Synchronicity. It's an I Ching program. She goes, you're the guy who did Synchronicity? She goes, that's the only software I've ever bought in my life. I just got a Macintosh, and that's the only software I've bought. I go, you're kidding me. She goes, no. Well, I'm leasing this house to you right now. I mean, that's just, these stories are true stories, and it's happening to me to this day. I didn't go to China to meet I Ching experts. I went there for a conference, and I end up having to sing. Now I'm translating my I Ching into Chinese. It's a beautiful thing. The Synchronistic Lifestyle is the title of Chapter 12 of the Great Decisions Perfect Timing book, The Synchronistic Lifestyle. When your timing starts getting good and you're in alignment with who you are and what you're supposed to be doing in the sense of creating meaning in your life, you are living, things get really magical.
I've heard that so many times, but how do you make that mental switch to open yourself to viewing the synchronicities in your life or to inviting them in?
You read my book. That's step one. Actually, that is the best advice I could give.
We don't have that much time left in our interview today, but what is the intersection of synchronicity, intuition, aside from reading your book? What piece of advice can you give people to invite that into their lives?
Well, Chapter 11 is entitled Belief Engineering, and if we can start cultivating, we need to, what I say in that chapter is we need to update our beliefs just like we update the apps on our smartphone. Beliefs need to always be subject to change and upgrading. And so there are some visionary beliefs that I would ask people to entertain and at least try out. And one of them is that change is your friend. If you believe that change is your friend, then you're starting to invite synchronicities into your consciousness because they're happening all the time. But we're afraid of change to a great extent. Or some people, sometimes we think change is a threat, or we feel that change is a threat. But if you can cultivate the belief that change is your friend, then you're going to be more open to noticing the synchronicities that are happening all the time. Another belief that you can entertain and just try it on and see how it works. You don't have to prove anything, is everything happens for a reason. Now, I can't prove that, Miriam, and I'll never be able to prove that, but I believe that. Why do I believe that? Because it works. It works for me to think that everything happens for a reason, and to also understand that it's not my job to know what the reason is necessarily. I mean, of course I want to know, and people agonize over things. Well, why did this happen to me? And oh my God, why did this happen to me? And that is the biggest waste of time. And if they would just say, well, I don't know why this happened to me. Maybe I will in a few months or a year. But no matter what, I know it's happening for a reason. And even though maybe it feels like a setback, maybe there's a good reason. I'm avoiding going into some deep pit or some dead end street, or there's some new opportunity that wants an opening. We don't know. We're not in control. So everything happens for a reason. So we entertain these kind of beliefs, and then we start noticing signals, the synchronicities, and intuition is. The ability to read between the lines. It's the ability to see these patterns and connect the dots in new ways using the sixth sense. So that's right. I'll just leave you with those notes.
Okay. And so, Paul, your website is divination.com?
That's right.
That's the one to go to.
Right.
Well, we have been speaking with Paul O'Brien about his book, Great Decisions, Perfect Timing, Cultivating Intuitive Intelligence. And you could tell from the discussion that it's a book very worthwhile picking up. Paul, thanks so much for being with us today.
It's been a pleasure, Miriam.
I'm Miriam Knight. Thank you for listening. Goodbye. Many blessings.